The credit card machine beeped twice, then a third time. Error. Marissa Okonkwo stood at the first-class lounge reception desk, watching the attendant's expression shift from professional courtesy to something colder, something familiar. The transformation was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, a slight pursing of the lips, but Marissa had catalogued that look 1,000 times before. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the attendant said, her voice now clipped. "This card appears to be declined." The American Express Centurion card sat on the marble counter between them. Black titanium, no credit limit. The card that required a minimum of $500,000 in annual spending just to receive an invitation. Marissa had 3. "Run it again," Marissa said calmly, though her fingers tightened imperceptibly around her boarding pass. "Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because the next special soul relief story is one you definitely don't want to miss." Behind her, she heard the muffled snicker. Didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The Harrington Group executives had been watching her since she'd stepped out of the town car. 4 men in expensive suits, whispering behind cupped hands like schoolboys. She'd felt their eyes on her back the entire walk through the terminal. The attendant swiped again. This time, she didn't even wait for the machine to respond. "Perhaps you have another form of payment? A regular card?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Marissa's phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. A text from her assistant, Denise, asterisk. "They're already at gate 14. Victor Harrington asking where you are. Says the contract signing can't wait. Asterisk. $5,400,000,000. That's what today was worth. The largest acquisition in the history of Nexus Technologies. Her company, her creation, her 16-year miracle, built from a studio apartment and a maxed-out credit card. And now, 30 minutes before the most important meeting of her life, she was being told her black card was declined. "There's nothing wrong with that card," Marissa said, her voice dropping into the register that made her executive team pay attention. "Check your machine." The attendant's smile had frozen into something artificial. "Ma'am, I've already run it twice. Perhaps there's been a mistake at the issuing bank? If you'd like to step aside while we assist other guests." "I'll wait." The line was building behind her. Businessmen checking watches, a woman in her mess huffing audibly, and always, the Harrington executives watching, waiting for her to fail. What they couldn't know, what none of them would ever know, was that Marissa Okonkwo had been waiting her entire life to fail. Had expected it every single day since she was 11 years old, sleeping on a mattress in her grandmother's pantry in Detroit. Failure was the ghost that whispered in her ear during every board meeting, every product launch, every handshake with investors who looked through her before they looked at her. But failure had never come. And it wasn't coming today. Marissa reached into her Birkin bag, the one that had once been photographed for Vogue Business, and retrieved a second phone, the one with 3 contacts saved. 3 numbers that could move markets, topple governments, end careers. She dialed the first one. "Sharon, it's Marissa. I'm at Hartsfield-Jackson, first-class lounge, Terminal B." "Yes, now." A pause. "Run my card activity for the last 48 hours and tell me if anything has been flagged." The attendant's face had gone pale. Behind her, a supervisor had materialized, eyes darting nervously between Marissa and the growing line. "Is everything all right here?" the supervisor asked, reaching for diplomatic. "That depends," Marissa replied, phone still pressed to her ear. "Does this establishment regularly accuse its Centurion members of card fraud, or am I receiving special treatment?" The supervisor's mouth opened, closed, opened again. On the phone, Sharon's voice came through clearly. "Marissa, there's been a block placed on the terminal side. Someone at that location manually flagged your card as potentially fraudulent. I'm looking at the timestamp now. It was entered 6 minutes ago." 6 minutes ago. When she'd walked through the door, Marissa's eyes found the attendant's name tag. Asterisk, Candace, asterisk. She committed it to memory. Not for revenge, Marissa had neither the time nor the interest in petty vengeance, but for the report she would file with American Express within the hour. A report that would be read by people who could make Candace's career disappear with a single email. "Clear it," Marissa said into the phone. "Already done. Try it now." Marissa set the phone down and gestured toward the card still sitting on the counter. "Run it again. Please." The machine didn't beep this time. It chirped. The receipt printed smoothly, confirming what Marissa had known all along. There had never been anything wrong with her card. I apologize for the inconvenience, the supervisor stammered. Please, allow us to escort you to our premium seating area. Champagne on the house, of course. I don't drink before business meetings, Marissa said, collecting her card and sliding it back into her wallet. But I'll take the apology. In writing. To my assistant. Today. She turned then, and for the first time, she allowed herself to look directly at the Harrington executives. 3 of them had the decency to look away. The 4th, Philip Mercer, CFO, Old Money, Connecticut, Yale rowing team, held her gaze with a smirk that said everything. You don't belong here. Marissa had heard that message in 1,000 different forms. From professors who underestimated her, from investors who dismissed her, from competitors who assumed her success was a fluke, a quota hire, affirmative action given flesh. They were all wrong, every single one of them. And in exactly 27 minutes, Philip Mercer and his colleagues were going to learn just how wrong they were. The first-class lounge of any major airport is a world unto itself. Climate-controlled sanctuaries where coffee costs nothing and time moves differently. Marissa found a seat near the windows, away from the Harrington group, and allowed herself 3 minutes of stillness. In those 3 minutes, she did what she always did before a battle. She remembered where she came from. 1989. Detroit, the year the crack epidemic swallowed her father whole. Marissa had been 7 years old when Marcus Okonkwo stopped coming home. Her mother, Grace, had tried to shield her from the truth, but children understand more than adults think. They understand empty cupboards. They understand the electricity being cut off. They understand the sound of their mother crying in the bathroom at 2 a.m., thinking no one can hear. By the time Marissa was 11, they'd lost the apartment. Grace worked 3 jobs: hotel maid, grocery cashier, night shift at a textile plant, and still they couldn't keep up. The pantry in Grandma Ruby's house became home, a converted closet with just enough room for a twin mattress and a milk crate that held all of Marissa's possessions. What Marissa remembered most about those years wasn't the poverty. It was the promise she made to herself, written on the inside cover of her algebra textbook in purple ink: I will never be helpless again. She'd kept that promise, valedictorian, full scholarship to MIT, first job at a tech startup that went public within 2 years. Then the idea, the one that woke her up at 3 a.m. with her heart racing for a cloud computing platform that would revolutionize how small businesses managed their operations. Nexus Technologies. Born in a studio apartment in Cambridge, raised on ramen noodles and 16-hour days. Worth, as of last quarter, $8.7 billion. All of it hers. Miss Okonkwo? Marissa looked up. A young man in airport staff uniform stood before her, holding a tablet. Your party at Gate 14 has requested your presence. They say the other representatives have arrived. Other representatives. The Harrington Group's board of directors had flown in from London specifically for this signing. Victor Harrington himself, third-generation industrialist, Forbes list fixture, the man whose grandfather had built a shipping empire on the backs of workers who looked like Marissa had left his country estate to be here. The acquisition had been years in the making. Harrington's legacy media holdings were bleeding money in the digital age, and they needed Nexus's technology to survive. Marissa needed their distribution networks to expand globally. On paper, it was a perfect marriage. In practice, it was a transaction between people who would never see each other as equals. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, Marissa said. The young man hesitated. They said it was urgent, ma'am. They can wait. Her tone left no room for argument. The young man nodded and retreated. Marissa used the 5 minutes to check her reflection in her phone screen. Not out of vanity, she had no patience for vanity, but out of strategy. Every detail mattered. The structured navy blazer that cost more than some cars. The natural curls she'd spent years learning to love after childhood. Bullies called her hair dirty and unprofessional. The diamond studs her mother had given her the day Nexus went public. Purchased with money Marissa had secretly deposited into Grace's account for years. You look like you belong in a boardroom, her mother had said that day, eyes wet with pride. No, Mama, Marissa had replied. I look like I own the boardroom. She stood, gathered her bag, and walked toward Gate 14. The The private meeting room adjacent to the gate had been reserved for the occasion. Glass walls overlooked the runway where chartered jets waited like patient metal birds. Inside, a long mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs filled with men who turned as Marissa entered. Victor Harrington sat at the head. At 73, he looked exactly like his photographs, silver-haired, thin-lipped, with the patrician bearing of someone who had never doubted his place in any room. His eyes tracked Marissa's approach with the cool assessment of a predator evaluating potential prey. Flanking him were the executives she'd seen in the lounge. Philip Mercer, the CFO with the smirk. James Denton, Chief Operating Officer, whose background check had revealed a string of discrimination lawsuits settled out of court. And Lawrence Beck, General Counsel, a man whose only distinguishing feature was his aggressive lack of distinguishing features. On her side of the table sat her own team, Denise Washington, her executive assistant, and the only person who knew where all the bodies were buried, Michael Chen, her lead counsel, and Thomas Wright, her CFO. "Miss Okonkwo," Victor Harrington said, not rising. "We were beginning to worry." "No need." Marissa took her seat at the opposite head of the table, a power move she'd calculated, refusing to sit subordinate. "I'm exactly on time." "We were told there was a delay at the lounge," Philip Mercer interjected, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Something about a credit card issue?" The words hung in the air. Marissa felt her team stiffen. Denise's pen stopped moving. Michael's jaw tightened. "Resolved," Marissa said simply. "Shall we proceed?" Victor Harrington waved a dismissive hand. "Of course, though I admit I'm curious. The famous Marissa Okonkwo, architect of Nexus, reduced to credit card troubles? Surely that's not a sign of things to come?" The question was a test. Everything with these men was a test. Marissa had been tested her entire life, tested more than her white counterparts, held to higher standards, given fewer chances to stumble. She never stumbled. "Mr. Harrington, my company posted revenue of $2.1 billion last quarter. Our cloud infrastructure serves 43% of the Fortune 500. And the credit card in question has no limit." She leaned forward, just slightly. "The only trouble at the lounge was a system error that was corrected within minutes. But I appreciate your concern." Victor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Of course, I meant no offense." "None taken." The contracts had already been reviewed 100 times, every clause negotiated, every contingency addressed. The signing itself was meant to be ceremonial champagne corks and handshakes, photo opportunities for the business press that waited in an adjacent room. But as Michael slid the documents across the table, Marissa noticed something she'd missed before. A slight tension in Victor's posture, a glance between Philip and Lawrence that lasted a beat too long. Something was wrong. "Before we sign," Lawrence Beck said, his voice carefully neutral, "there's a small matter we need to address." Marissa's instincts, honed by 16 years of boardroom combat, snapped to attention. Which matter would that be? The equity restructuring provision. Thomas, her CFO, frowned. "That provision was finalized 3 weeks ago." "Yes, well," Lawrence cleared his throat, "circumstances have evolved. The board has determined that the original terms no longer reflect the realities of the transaction." Marissa's blood ran cold. "Explain." Victor Harrington took over, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Miss Okonkwo, you must understand. When this deal was proposed, Nexus's stock was trading at a premium. But recent market corrections have raised concerns about valuation. The stock is down 6%, normal fluctuation. Perhaps, but our analysts have conducted additional due diligence. There are questions about certain proprietary technologies, questions about whether the intellectual property is as original as represented." The accusation landed like a slap. "Are you suggesting," Marissa said slowly, "that my technology is stolen?" "Not at all." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Simply that the innovation premium factored into the purchase price may have been overstated. We're proposing a revised equity split. Instead of the agreed 32% stake in the combined entity, Nexus shareholders would receive 18%. 18%, less than half of what she'd negotiated. A figure that would dilute her control to near irrelevance, turn her from a partner into a passenger in the company she'd built from nothing." "That's unacceptable," Thomas said immediately. "It's not a negotiation," Lawrence replied. It's a condition. Marissa sat perfectly still. She'd been in this position before, not the specifics, but the shape of it. The moment when powerful men decided to take what they wanted because they believed they could, because they believed she had no choice. They always underestimated her choices. Let me understand, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. You've waited until the moment of signing to introduce terms that would fundamentally alter the transaction. Terms you know I would never accept. Victor shrugged elegantly. Markets change. We're businessmen. Surely you understand. What I understand, Marissa replied, is that this has nothing to do with markets or due diligence. This is about power. You assumed I needed this deal badly enough to accept humiliation. You assumed wrong. Philip Mercer leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. With respect, Miss Okonkwo, you don't have many options. Your board has already approved the merger. Your shareholders are expecting the announcement. Walking away now would tank your stock price. You've done your research. We do our homework. The room had gone very still. Denise's hand hovered over her phone, ready for instructions. Michael was gripping his pen so tightly his knuckles had whitened. This was the moment, the fulcrum point. Everything Marissa had built, everything she had sacrificed, came down to the next 30 seconds. She thought of her mother, working those 3 jobs. She thought of her grandmother's pantry, the milk crate, the purple-inked promise. She thought of every door that had been slammed in her face, every opportunity denied, every time someone had looked at her skin and seen a limitation instead of a human being. And she smiled. Gentlemen, she said, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. This deal, the one we've spent 2 years negotiating, the one your company needs to survive the next decade, dies the moment I walk out of this room. And I will walk out. In fact, I'm looking forward to it. Victor's smile faltered. You're bluffing. Am I? Marissa stood slowly, smoothing the front of her blazer. Let me tell you what happens next. I leave this meeting. Your stock drops 15% by market close, as analysts realize the merger is dead. Your board demands answers. And you, Victor Harrington, third-generation patriarch, get to explain to your shareholders why you sabotaged the only lifeline that could have saved your dying media empire. You need us as much as we need you, Lawrence insisted, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Do I? Nexus generates $2 billion in annual revenue with no debt and 80% profit margins. We have a dozen acquisition offers pending at any given time. Amazon called last week. Microsoft called the week before. She paused, letting the names land. I don't need you, Mr. Beck. I've never needed you, but I was willing to help you. That offer expires in approximately 10 seconds. The silence was absolute. Philip Mercer's smirk had finally vanished. James Denton was staring at the table like it might offer escape. Even Victor Harrington, for the first time since Marissa had met him, looked uncertain. Perhaps, Victor said carefully, we could revisit the original terms. No. The word hung in the air. The original terms are no longer available, Marissa continued. You've demonstrated exactly who you are. You assumed that because I'm a black woman, I could be bullied. That I would fold. That my success was somehow less real than yours. She gathered her documents. I have no interest in partnering with people who see me that way. Miss Okonkwo, Victor started. We're done here. She nodded to her team. Thomas rose immediately, followed by Michael and Denise. The choreography was perfect. Years of working together had created an unspoken understanding. When Marissa moved, they moved. As she reached the door, Victor's voice stopped her. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. Marissa turned one final time. In the light from the runway windows, her natural curls caught the sun, framing a face carved from determination and hard-won wisdom. Mr. Harrington, I've built an empire from nothing. I've survived racism and sexism and poverty, and people like you who assume I'm less than what I am. Regret is for people who don't know their own value. She opened the door. I know mine. The next 6 hours would become legend in business school case studies. Marissa Okonkwo did not simply walk away from the Harrington deal. She detonated it. Every piece of carefully constructed negotiation, 2 years of legal work, billion-dollar projections, all of it reduced to ash by a woman who refused to be diminished. By the time she reached her car, the town car waiting exactly where she'd left it, her phone was already buzzing with alerts. News of the collapsed merger had leaked somehow. Stock tickers were moving. "Where to, Miss Okonkwo?" the driver asked. "The Ritz-Carlton. I need to make some calls." From the back seat, Marissa watched the Atlanta skyline slide past. The city that had become her second home, headquarters of the empire she'd built. 16 years of her life poured into Nexus Technologies. 16 years of proving, over and over, that she belonged. She was tired of proving. Her personal phone, the one her mother had the number for, buzzed with a text. Asterisk. Saw the news. "You okay, baby?" Asterisk. Marissa typed back, "I'm fine. We'll call tonight. Love you." The business phone buzzed next. This time it was the number she'd been expecting. Marissa. The voice on the other end was warm, measured. Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises. Ally, occasional competitor. One of the few people in her stratosphere who had never underestimated her. "I just saw the wire. Is it true?" "It's true." Harrington tried to change the terms at the signing. "Tried to cut my equity stake to 18%. A low whistle. Bold move. Stupid, but bold. I walked. "I assumed you would, which is why I'm calling." A pause. "Have dinner with me tonight. There's something I want to discuss." The Ritz-Carlton's rooftop restaurant was nearly empty when Marissa arrived. Alexander had reserved the best table corner, windows, view of the city lights, spreading toward the horizon like scattered diamonds. He rose as she approached, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that made his silver hair appear distinguished rather than old. "You look tired," he observed as she sat. "I just walked away from $5 billion. I'm exhausted." Alexander signaled for wine. "Tell me what happened. Everything." "Over dinner?" She did. The credit card incident at the lounge. The executives watching, waiting for her to fail. The ambush at the signing table. Victor's assumptions. Philip's smirk. The moment she realized they had never seen her as an equal. Alexander listened without interrupting. When she finished, he set down his wineglass and leaned back. "What you did took courage," he said. "Most people would have accepted the reduced terms, called it the cost of doing business. I'm not most people." "No, you're not." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a document. "Which is why I want you to read this." Marissa took the paper. Her eyes moved across the text, and as they did, her heartbeat accelerated. "This is a formal proposal. Sterling Enterprises would like to acquire Nexus Technologies. Full acquisition, not a merger. You'd receive $12.8 billion in combined cash and stock, with an additional earn-out clause based on integration milestones." He paused. "And you'd retain your position as CEO of the combined technology division for a minimum of 5 years. $12.8 billion, more than double what Harrington had offered, with terms that kept her in control. When did you? I've been working on this for 6 months. Was planning to approach you next quarter, but given today's events, I accelerated the timeline." Alexander's expression softened. "Marissa, Harrington didn't deserve you. His company is a sinking ship, and he tried to make you the lifeline without paying the proper price. Sterling is different. We're not in survival mode. We're in growth mode. And we want your technology to power that growth." Marissa stared at the document. She'd spent 16 years building something precious, and now here was a chance to take it further than she'd ever imagined. Global reach. Resources she couldn't access alone. A partner who saw her as an asset rather than an inconvenience. But there was more to consider. "My employees," she said. "Nexus has 4,000 people who depend on me. All employment contracts would be honored. No layoffs for 3 years, guaranteed in writing. My mother has shares, small stake, but it's her retirement. Every shareholder receives the same payout ratio. Your mother's shares would be worth approximately $14 million. 14 million. Grace Okonkwo, who'd spent 20 years working her body to the bone, would never have to worry about money again." "I need time," Marissa said. "This is..." "Take all the time you need. I'll have my people send over the full proposal tomorrow morning." Alexander rose, leaving enough cash on the table to cover dinner 3 times over. "But Marissa, don't take too long. Opportunities like this have a way of becoming complicated if they're left to linger." That night, Marissa sat in her hotel suite overlooking the city. The documents from Alexander's team had arrived by courier within the hour, a thick legal brief that contained the architecture of her possible future. She should have been reading it. Instead, she was staring at the screen of her personal phone, a contact pulled up but not dialed. Marcus Okonkwo. Her father. The man who had vanished when she was 7. The ghost she'd spent her entire life outrunning. She'd found him 12 years ago. A private investigator, hired when she finally had money to spend, had tracked him to a halfway house in Florida. He'd been sober for 3 years at that point. Had remarried. Had another daughter, a half-sister Marissa had never met. He'd written to her once, after the investigator made contact. A letter full of apologies and explanations. Excuses about addiction and weakness, and circumstances beyond his control. She'd never responded. Now, at 42 years old, about to make the biggest decision of her professional life, Marissa found herself wondering what her father would say. Not because she needed his approval, she'd learned long ago that she didn't need approval from anyone, but because some questions couldn't be answered alone. Asterisk. What do you do when you've won? What comes after proving yourself? Asterisk. The phone buzzed in her hand. Not the contact she'd been staring at, a new number she didn't recognize. Miss Okonkwo? The voice was female, young, hesitant. Who is this? My name is Nicole Harrington. Victor Harrington is my father. A pause. Please don't hang up. Nicole Harrington was not what Marissa expected. They met at a coffee shop the next morning, neutral territory, public space, no lawyers or assistants. Nicole arrived alone, dressed simply in jeans and a blouse that suggested she hadn't inherited her father's taste for ostentation. At 28, Victor's youngest daughter had the kind of face that suggested sleepless nights. Dark circles under her eyes, tension in her jaw. She ordered tea and barely touched it. Thank you for meeting me, Nicole said. I know you have no reason to. I have 30 minutes. Use them wisely. Nicole nodded, accepting the terms. I need to tell you something about my father, about the deal. It's going to sound like a betrayal, and maybe it is, but you deserve to know. Marissa waited. The terms he tried to force on you yesterday, the reduced equity stake, that wasn't a last-minute decision. It was planned months ago. Nicole's hands trembled slightly around her teacup. My father never intended to honor the original agreement. He was always going to try to minimize your share. The legal team had contingency documents prepared since March. Marissa felt the anger surge, hot and immediate, before discipline tamped it down. Why are you telling me this? Because it's wrong. What he did to you, what he's done to other people, it's wrong. Nicole met her eyes. I've watched my father destroy people my entire life. Competitors, employees, partners, anyone he perceived as a threat or an obstacle. He calls it business. I call it cruelty. And you're, what, growing a conscience? I've always had one. I just never had the courage to act on it. Nicole reached into her bag and produced a flash drive. This contains documentation of every acquisition the Harrington Group has completed in the last 15 years. Internal communications, suppressed reports, evidence of practices that are questionable at best, illegal at worst. Marissa stared at the drive but didn't touch it. Why would you give this to me? Because you're the only person I've ever seen stand up to him. Nicole's voice cracked slightly. When you walked out of that room yesterday, you took something from him that he can't get back. His certainty. His belief that everyone can be bought or bullied. She pushed the drive across the table. I want to help you take everything else. The contents of the flash drive would occupy Marissa's legal team for weeks. Financial irregularities spanning decades. Environmental violations covered up with strategic donations. A pattern of predatory acquisitions designed to strip companies of value and leave workers unemployed. And throughout all of it, Victor Harrington's direct involvement documented in his own words, his own emails, his own handwriting on internal memos. This is enough to bring down the entire company, Michael Chen said when he'd finished his preliminary review. The SEC violations alone carry criminal penalties, and there are antitrust issues that could result in forced divestiture. What about Victor personally? Depending on what the investigators find, he could be looking at prison time. 5 to 10 years if any of this ties to securities fraud. Marissa sat in her office, surrounded by the machinery of her empire. Outside the windows, Atlanta's skyline gleamed in the afternoon light. 16 floors below, 4,000 employees worked to build something remarkable. And now, on her desk, sat the power to destroy the man who had tried to destroy her. The question was whether she would use it. "You're hesitating," Alexander Sterling observed when they spoke that evening. "I can hear it in your voice." "I'm considering." Marissa, Victor Harrington, built his fortune on the backs of people he crushed. The evidence Nicole gave you, if you release it, you're not attacking an innocent man, you're exposing a predator. "I know what he is." "Then what's stopping you?" Marissa looked out her office window. What was stopping her? Not mercy, Victor deserved none. Not pragmatism, releasing the evidence would remove a competitor and potentially clear the path for the Sterling deal. Not morality, exposing wrongdoing was the right thing to do. But something in her resisted. "When I was a little girl," she said slowly, "my grandmother used to say that vengeance is a meal best left uneaten. She said the people who chase revenge end up becoming the thing they hate. This isn't revenge, it's justice." "Is it?" Marissa turned from the window. "Or is it me, proving I have power by using it to hurt someone, even someone who deserves it?" Alexander was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "You know what I admire most about you, Marissa? Not your brilliance, not your business acumen. It's your refusal to let the world make you cruel. Lesser people would have used that evidence the moment it touched their hands. You're actually thinking about who you want to be." "I've been thinking about it for 42 years. "And what have you decided?" Marissa looked at the flash drive on her desk. Such a small thing to contain so much destruction. "I've decided," she said finally, "that I'm not going to be the one to release it. But I'm not going to hide it either." The next morning, Marissa called Nicole Harrington. "I'm not going to use the evidence against your father," she said without preamble. "Not directly. But I'm going to give it to the appropriate authorities and let them decide what to do with it." Silence on the other end. Then, "You could destroy him. Why won't you?" "Because destroying him would mean spending my time and energy on someone who isn't worth it. I have a company to run, a legacy to build, a mother who needs to see that success doesn't require becoming a monster." Nicole's breath caught. "My father would never." "I know. That's the difference between us." Marissa paused. "Nicole, you did a brave thing bringing me that evidence. Braver than you probably realize. But now you need to decide what kind of person you're going to be. You can stay in his shadow, complicit in whatever comes next. Or you can build something of your own, something clean. I don't know how. Neither did I when I started, but I learned." Marissa looked at the city beyond her windows. "If you ever want advice, you have my number." 3 days later, Marissa sat across from Alexander Sterling in his Manhattan office, signing documents that would reshape the technology industry. The Nexus Sterling deal closed at $13.2 billion, higher than originally proposed after Marissa's team negotiated additional terms. Every condition she'd requested was met: employee protections, shareholder payouts, a seat on the combined company's board, and operational control of the technology division. When the final signature was complete, Alexander shook her hand. "Welcome to Sterling Enterprises, Marissa. Thank you for believing I was worth the investment." He smiled. "I've believed that since the first time we met. You were pitching to a room full of venture capitalists who thought you were someone's assistant. By the time you finished, they were writing checks. I remember. 3 of them tried to lowball me. And you walked away from all 3, waited for a better offer." He leaned back in his chair. "That's when I knew you were different. You were never desperate, never compromising, never willing to accept less than you deserved." Marissa thought of her mother, her grandmother's pantry, the promise written in purple ink. "I learned early," she said, "that accepting less than I deserved meant dying slowly. I chose to live." The evidence from Nicole's flash drive reached federal investigators within the week. Marissa kept her name out of it, an anonymous submission, untraceable, just data delivered to the people whose job it was to act on it. What happened next unfolded over months. Victor Harrington was indicted on 17 counts of securities fraud. Philip Mercer, the CFO who had smirked at her in the airport, was implicated in a scheme to manipulate Harrington's stock prices and fled to Switzerland before his arrest warrant was issued. James Denton and Lawrence Beck both negotiated plea deals in exchange for testimony. The Harrington Group, the empire 3 generations had built, collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Marissa watched the news coverage from her new corner office in the Sterling Tower, where her name now shared billing with one of the world's most recognizable corporate brands. "Do you feel vindicated?" a reporter asked during one of the many interviews that followed. Marissa considered the question carefully. "I feel focused," she replied. "Vindication suggests I was waiting for someone else to prove my worth. I've never waited for that. I've always known what I'm capable of." "Even when others doubted you?" Marissa thought of the attendant in the airport lounge, the credit card machine beeping error, the years of being underestimated, dismissed, overlooked. "Especially then," she said, "other people's doubts are just obstacles, and I've spent my whole life learning to climb over obstacles." 6 months after the Sterling deal closed, Marissa Okonkwo stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office and watched the sun set over Manhattan. 47 floors below, the city hummed with the energy of 8 million lives intersecting, colliding, transforming. Up here, in the silence of corporate altitude, she could almost forget she was part of it. Almost. Her phone buzzed on the desk behind her. Not the business phone, the personal one. The one her mother called every Sunday evening, without fail, for the past 16 years. "Hey, Mama." "Baby girl." Grace Okonkwo's voice carried the warmth of a woman who had survived everything and emerged with her kindness intact. "You sound tired." "Long week." "Every week is long for you. That's why I worry." Marissa smiled despite herself. At 71, Grace had finally retired from the hospital cafeteria where she'd worked for the past 15 years, her fourth career, after a lifetime of jobs that had worn her body down but never touched her spirit. The payout from the Sterling acquisition had made work optional, but Grace still volunteered at the church food bank twice a week. "Can't just sit around getting old," she'd said when Marissa suggested she rest. "Sitting is for people who've stopped living." "I'm fine, Mama, really." Grace's skepticism was audible. "You eating? You seeing anyone? You doing anything besides work?" "I eat, sometimes." "That's not an answer to my other questions." Marissa laughed, the sound surprising her. "I'm not seeing anyone, and work is complicated right now." "Complicated how?" "How to explain?" The Sterling merger had created the largest technology conglomerate in North America, but integration was proving more difficult than projected. Cultural clashes between Nexus's innovative startup ethos and Sterling's traditional corporate structure. Resistance from middle management, who saw the acquisition as a hostile takeover rather than a partnership. And always, the whisper campaigns about whether Marissa belonged in the room. She'd heard the rumors, everyone had, that Alexander Sterling had only bought Nexus to diversify his portfolio with a minority face, that Marissa's success was the product of quotas and political correctness, that the real power still resided with the white men who'd always held it. The rumors were wrong, but rumors didn't need to be true to cause damage. "Just the usual challenges," Marissa said. "Nothing I can't handle." "I know you can handle it. I just wish you didn't have to handle everything alone." The words landed harder than Grace probably intended. Marissa turned from the window, her reflection ghosting across the glass, a successful woman in an expensive office, surrounded by the trappings of achievement, standing utterly alone. "I'm not alone, Mama. I have you. You know what I mean." Marissa did know. She'd been single for 3 years now, since the end of a relationship that had crumbled under the weight of her ambition. David had been kind, patient, understanding until he wasn't, until the missed dinners and canceled vacations and endless conference calls had hollowed out whatever they'd been trying to build. "I love you," he'd said on his way out the door, "but I can't compete with your company, and I'm tired of trying." She hadn't fought for him to stay. Perhaps that said everything that needed saying. "Mama, I should go. Early meeting tomorrow." "Before you do," Grace paused, and something in the silence made Marissa's stomach tighten. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." "What is it?" "Your father called me." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire long thought extinguished. Marcus Okonkwo, the man who had walked out when Marissa was 7 years old, the man whose addiction had destroyed their family, whose absence had shaped every decision Marissa had ever made. The ghost she'd spent 42 years outrunning. "When?" Marissa's voice came out steadier than she felt. 2 weeks ago. I didn't want to tell you, but he's sick, baby. Cancer. The doctors say he has maybe 6 months." The information processed in fragments. Cancer, 6 months, dying. What does he want? He wants to see you, to apologize before, Grace's voice caught. Before he can't anymore. Marissa gripped the edge of her desk, knuckles whitening against the polished wood. 35 years of silence. 35 years of building a life specifically designed to prove she didn't need him. And now, at the end, he wanted absolution? I don't know if I can do that, Mama. I know. I'm not asking you to. I'm just telling you that the choice is there. Grace exhaled slowly. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But I wanted you to know, before it was too late to decide anything at all. After they hung up, Marissa sat in the darkness of her office for a long time. The city lights glittered beyond the windows, indifferent to her turmoil. Somewhere in Florida, a man she hadn't spoken to in decades was dying. A man who had abandoned her when she needed him most. Did she owe him anything? Forgiveness? Closure? Even acknowledgement? The questions had no easy answers, but Marissa Okonkwo had never been afraid of hard questions. She picked up her phone and began to search for flights to Tampa. The hospice facility sat on a quiet street lined with palm trees, a place designed to make death feel gentle. Marissa arrived at 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning, having spent the red-eye flight rehearsing what she would say. None of the rehearsals prepared her for the reality. Marcus Okonkwo had been a tall man once. She remembered that from childhood, the way he would lift her onto his shoulders so she could touch the ceiling. Now, diminished by illness, he seemed to have collapsed inward. The hospital bed dwarfed him. Tubes and monitors surrounded him like mechanical mourners. But his eyes, dark brown, same as hers, still held recognition when she appeared in the doorway. Marissa. Her name emerged as a rasp, but he smiled as he said it. You came. She stood frozen on the threshold. Part of her wanted to turn and run, to preserve the protective anger she'd cultivated for decades. But another part, the part that had never stopped being a 7-year-old girl waiting for her daddy to come home, moved her feet forward. I came. She sat in the chair beside his bed, maintaining careful distance. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The machines beeped and hummed, filling silence that felt too heavy for words. You look like your mother, Marcus finally said. Same eyes, same way of holding yourself, like you're ready to fight the world. I learned to fight early, had to. The implication landed. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, accepting the blow. I know. He stopped, coughing weakly. When he recovered, his voice was thinner. There's nothing I can say that makes it right. I know that. I'm not asking you to forgive me. Then, what are you asking? Just to listen. Just once. So I can say what I should have said 35 years ago. Marissa sat back in her chair, arms crossed. The defensive posture of a lifetime. I'm listening. Marcus told his story in fragments, pausing frequently to catch his breath or gather his thoughts. Marissa listened without interrupting, cataloging facts she'd never known. He'd been a promising engineer in the 1,980 seconds, one of the few black men in his program at Wayne State. He'd met Grace at a church social, married her within a year, welcomed Marissa with joy that he still remembered as the brightest of his life. Then the plant where he worked closed. Layoffs, recession, the slow erosion of everything he thought he'd built. I started using to cope, he said, the words carrying the weight of confession repeated many times in recovery rooms. Just to take the edge off, that's what I told myself. But the edge kept getting sharper, and the using kept getting worse, until there was nothing left of me that wasn't the addiction. You left, Marissa said flatly. You walked out the door, and you never came back. I left because I was destroying you, both of you. Every day I stayed, I broke something else. I thought, his voice cracked, I thought you'd be better off without me. We almost starved without you. I know. Mama worked 3 jobs. I slept in a pantry. I know. And you thought we were better off? Marcus met her eyes. In his gaze, she saw not excuses, but acceptance, the terrible clarity of a man who had stopped lying to himself. I was a coward. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was running from the shame of what I'd become. There's no way to dress that up. I failed you, both of you. And I've spent every day since trying to become someone worthy of asking for your forgiveness. They talked for 3 hours. Marcus told her about his years on the street after leaving Detroit, the spiral into harder drugs, the arrest that finally broke through his denial, The decade of recovery, relapse, and recovery again. The halfway house in Florida where he'd finally gotten sober at 52. He told her about his second marriage to a woman named Patricia, who worked as a counselor at the recovery center. About his daughter, Maya, now 23, who knew she had a half-sister she'd never met. Patricia wanted me to reach out years ago, he admitted. But I was afraid you'd reject me, afraid of what I'd see in your eyes. What do you see now? Marcus studied her for a long moment. I see a woman who built something extraordinary, who took everything I failed to give her and turned it into strength. His voice dropped. I see your mother's courage in you, and I hope there's something of me that contributed to who you became, even if it was just the determination to be different. Marissa felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness that would take time, if it came at all, but something adjacent to it. Understanding, perhaps. Or the recognition that the man in this bed was not the monster she'd built in her memory. He was just a man, broken and rebuilt, dying and desperate to make peace with the damage he'd caused. I can't promise anything, she said finally. I can't promise forgiveness, or a relationship, or happy endings. But I can promise to try to see you as you are now, not just as the man who left. Tears slipped down Marcus's weathered cheeks. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but it's what I'm offering. Before she left, Marcus reached for her hand. His grip was weak but warm. There's a letter, he said. I wrote it years ago. For you, Maya has it. Would you meet her? Your sister? Sister. The word felt strange in her mouth, applied to a stranger. I'll think about it, Marissa said. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a no. Maya Okonkwo Patterson worked as a social worker in Tampa, helping families navigate the foster care system. Marissa found her at a coffee shop near the waterfront, having arranged the meeting through an intermediary. At 23, Maya had inherited Marcus's height and Grace's warm eyes, a strange genetic echo that made Marissa's breath catch. She rose when Marissa approached, uncertainty and hope warring in her expression. You came, Maya said, the same words Marcus had used. Apparently both of them had expected rejection. I came. They sat across from each other, two strangers connected by blood and a shared ghost. Dad talks about you all the time, Maya began, then caught herself. I mean, he talks about you. What he remembers. What he missed. What does he remember? Little things. Teaching you to ride a bike. Your laugh when you were happy. The way you used to fall asleep on his chest watching cartoons. Maya's voice was gentle. He's carried those memories like treasures. Even when he was at his worst, he talked about his daughter in Detroit who was going to do something amazing someday. Marissa felt the walls around her heart tremble. All these years, she'd assumed Marcus had forgotten her, had moved on without a backward glance. The idea that he'd carried her with him, even through addiction, even through starting over with a new family, was harder to process than his abandonment had been. I built my whole life around proving I didn't need him, she admitted. Around being so successful that his leaving wouldn't matter. Did it work? Marissa thought of the Sterling Tower, the billions of dollars, the magazine covers and conference keynotes, an endless accumulation of achievement. I thought it did. For a long time I thought it did. And now? Now I'm not sure anymore. Maya handed over the letter Marcus had mentioned. Marissa didn't open it, then couldn't open it, not with an audience, but she promised to read it. The sisters exchanged numbers, made tentative plans to talk again. It wasn't a reunion, it wasn't healing, but it was a beginning. On the flight back to New York, Marissa finally unfolded the letter. Marcus's handwriting was shaky but legible, the words of a man facing mortality with clear eyes. My dearest Marissa, if you're reading this, it means I found the courage to give you what I should have given years ago, an explanation, an apology, and the truth. The truth is this. There has not been a single day since I left that I haven't thought about you. Not one. In my darkest moments, when the addiction was all I had left, the memory of your face was the only light I could find. I know I failed you. I know there are no words that can undo the damage. But I want you to know that my leaving was never about not loving you. It was about loving you too much to keep destroying your life with my presence. I was wrong. I know that now. I should have stayed and fought, should have gotten help, should have been the father you deserved. Instead, I ran, and I've spent 35 years trying to become the man I should have been. Whatever you've built, Whatever you've achieved, know this. It came from you. Your strength, your determination, your mother's love, and your own unbreakable spirit. I contributed nothing to your success except the obstacle you had to overcome. But if, somewhere in your heart, you can find any gratitude for that obstacle, for the fire that forged you into who you became, then maybe my leaving wasn't entirely without purpose. I love you, Marissa. I always have. I always will. Even if I never get to tell you in person. Even if you never read these words. My beautiful daughter, my greatest regret, my deepest pride. Dad. By the time she finished reading, Marissa's face was wet with tears. She didn't remember crying. 3 weeks later, Marcus Okonkwo died peacefully in his sleep. Marissa was not there. Work had called her to Singapore for an emergency meeting. She couldn't postpone, but Maya called her the moment it happened. He went easy, Maya said through tears. The last thing he said was your name. Marissa attended the funeral, sat in the back row, watched strangers mourn a man she had only just begun to know. Afterward, she stood at the grave with Maya and Patricia, 3 women bound by the complicated legacy of a complicated man. Thank you for coming, Patricia said. She was a small woman with kind eyes and a quiet strength that reminded Marissa of her own mother. It would have meant everything to him. I should have come sooner. You came when you could. That's what matters. The world didn't stop for Marissa's grief. Business continued. Meetings and negotiations and the endless machinery of corporate leadership. But something had shifted inside her, a recalibration of priorities that manifested in unexpected ways. She started delegating more, taking weekends off, flying to Detroit once a month to visit her mother, who was delighted by the change. You're finally learning, Grace said during one of those visits. Success doesn't mean anything if you're too busy to enjoy it. I always thought I was enjoying it. No, baby. You were surviving it. There's a difference. The real test came 8 months after Marcus's death. Sterling Enterprises had identified an acquisition target, a European media conglomerate called Werner Braun Group, headquartered in Munich. The deal would expand their global footprint significantly and cement their position as an industry leader. The problem was the seller. Klaus Werner, the company's chairman, was old-school European aristocracy. His family had built their empire over 3 generations, and Klaus had very specific ideas about who was worthy of inheriting it. In their preliminary meeting, he'd barely acknowledged Marissa's presence, directing all his questions to the male executives in the room. He's not going to negotiate with you, Alexander Sterling warned after that first disastrous meeting. His generation, his background, he doesn't see women as business equals. Certainly not. He stopped, but Marissa finished the sentence. Certainly not black women. I'm sorry. I wish it were different. It's not. So what do we do about it? Alexander sighed. I can take the lead on negotiations. Present you as a subordinate, at least in the meetings. Behind the scenes, you'd still be running everything. No. Marissa. I said no. Her voice was firm but not angry. I've spent my entire career accommodating people who couldn't see past their own prejudices. I'm done. If Klaus Werner can't do business with me, then we don't do business with Klaus Werner. We're talking about a $4 billion acquisition. I know exactly what we're talking about. And my answer is the same. The Werner Braun negotiations stalled. News of the impasse leaked to the business press, which speculated endlessly about what was happening behind closed doors. Some analysts suggested Sterling was overreaching. Others whispered that the real problem was Marissa herself, that she was too aggressive, too uncompromising, too difficult to work with international partners. Marissa ignored the noise. She'd learned long ago that public opinion was a weather system, unpredictable, uncontrollable, and ultimately irrelevant to anyone focused on long-term goals. Then, unexpectedly, an opportunity emerged. Klaus Werner had a granddaughter named Elise. At 35, she was the youngest member of the Werner family board, and, according to Alexander's intelligence, deeply frustrated with her grandfather's resistance to modernization. She'd studied at Harvard Business School, had spent 3 years at a Silicon Valley startup, saw the future more clearly than the old guard who controlled her family's legacy. Marissa reached out directly. Miss Werner, my name is Marissa Okonkwo. I'm CEO of Sterling's technology division. I'd like to buy you dinner. A pause, then curious. Why? Because I think we have more in common than either of us expected. and because I believe we can help each other. They met in London, neutral territory, equidistant from both their bases. Elise Werner was tall and blonde, with the polished elegance of European old money, but her eyes held an intensity that reminded Marissa of herself. "My grandfather thinks you're trying to steal our company," Elise said over appetizers. "He's convinced Sterling wants to strip our assets and destroy everything my family built." "Your grandfather is wrong." "I know. I've read your proposals. The integration plan protects Werner Braun's editorial independence, preserves jobs, invests in infrastructure." Elise set down her fork. "It's actually fair. I know what it's like to have someone try to take what you've built. I wouldn't do that to anyone else." Elise studied her for a long moment. "The Harrington situation. I read about it. They tried to change the terms at the last minute. They tried to take advantage of what they thought was desperation. They were wrong. And now Victor Harrington is in federal prison. That had nothing to do with me. The evidence spoke for itself." Elise smiled slightly. "You're careful with your words. I respect that." She leaned forward. "What do you actually want, Miss Okonkwo? Not Sterling. You. What do you want from this deal?" It was a question no one had ever asked. Marissa considered her answer carefully. "I want to build something that outlasts me. Something that creates value for people who need it. My company started as a tool for small businesses, people who were underserved by the existing technology giants. I want to keep that mission alive, even as we grow. Even if it means lower profit margins? Even then, money is a tool, not a destination. If all I wanted was money, I would have cashed out years ago." Elise was quiet for a moment. Then, "My grandfather will never negotiate with you. His prejudices are too deep, and he's too proud to change at his age. But I have a proposal." "I'm listening." "Let me take the lead on our side. Grandfather is stepping back from day-to-day operations. He won't admit it publicly, but his health is declining. Within 6 months, I'll have controlling authority over the board. If you can wait that long, I'll bring you a deal that works for everyone." "You're asking me to wait 6 months on a handshake promise." "I'm asking you to trust me, the way you trusted Alexander Sterling when everyone else said you were crazy." Marissa flew back to New York that night with a decision to make. 6 months was an eternity in business. Markets shifted, competitors moved. The window for acquisitions opened and closed unpredictably. But there was something about Elise Werner, the clarity of her vision, the honesty in her eyes that reminded Marissa of herself at the same age. Hungry, ambitious, trapped by circumstances she hadn't created. "Sometimes you have to take the leap," her grandmother used to say, "and trust the net will appear." She called Alexander from the airport, standing in the terminal with early morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. "I need you to table the Werner Braun pursuit for 6 months. Silence on the other end. Then, "That's a significant delay. The board will want to know why." "Tell them I'm cultivating an internal ally, someone who can deliver the deal on better terms than we're currently projecting." "And if she can't deliver?" Marissa watched travelers hurrying past business people with briefcases, families with children, individuals lost in their own journeys. The airport hummed with movement and purpose, lives intersecting briefly before diverging again. "Then we reassess, but I believe she can. I believe she will." "You're putting a lot of faith in a stranger." "I'm putting faith in someone who reminds me of who I used to be. That's different." The 6 months passed. Marissa used the time to strengthen Sterling's existing operations, to expand Nexus's product offerings, to build the foundation for whatever came next. She visited her mother regularly, talked to Maya once a week, allowed herself, for the first time in years, to have something resembling a personal life. She even started dating again cautiously, carefully, with a corporate attorney named James who understood her schedule and respected her boundaries. He didn't try to compete with her company. He simply wanted to be part of her life, in whatever capacity she could offer. "I'm not asking for everything," he said one night over dinner. "Just whatever you can give." It was the opposite of everything David had demanded, and somehow that made all the difference. Exactly 6 months after their London dinner, Elise Werner called. "It's done. Grandfather is retiring. I've been named chairman of the board." A pause, weighted with significance. "I'm ready to negotiate." The deal that followed was the largest in Sterling Enterprises history. Not $4 billion that had been the original projection, but $5.4 billion, reflecting Werner Braun's true value without the defensive posturing that had inflated earlier estimates. The signing ceremony was scheduled for the Munich headquarters, but Elise insisted on one symbolic gesture. The actual exchange of signatures would happen at an airport. Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta. The same airport where Marissa's card had been declined, where she'd walked away from a deal that tried to diminish her, where her journey to this moment had truly begun. "It seems fitting," Elise explained. "You could have pursued this acquisition through conventional channels. You could have waited for my grandfather to come around, or worked around him through intermediaries. Instead, you took a risk on me, on trust. I want to honor that." The terminal was flooded with light when they gathered. Marissa stood in the center of the space, phone pressed to her ear, finalizing last-minute details with her legal team. Her thick, naturally curly hair framed her face, falling around her shoulders in the way she'd finally learned to embrace after years of straightening and styling to meet others' expectations. Across from her, Thomas Wright, her CFO, who had been there since the Harrington disaster, waited with documents in hand. His expression was calm but intent, focused entirely on the woman who had built an empire from nothing. Behind them, two men from Sterling's legal department stood in matching tan suits, observing the proceedings with the quiet attention of professionals who understood the gravity of what was happening. "Everything's confirmed," the voice on the phone said. "The wire transfer completes the moment you sign. And the employee protections? Ironclad. No layoffs for 3 years, exactly as you specified. Werner Braun's workforce is fully protected." Marissa ended the call and turned to face the assembled group. Elise Werner stood at the table where the documents waited, pen in hand. "Miss Okonkwo," Elise said formally, though her eyes held warmth, "shall we make history?" Marissa approached the table. For a moment, she allowed herself to look around at the travelers hurrying past, at the airport that had witnessed her lowest moment, and now her triumph, at the faces of people who had believed in her when belief was hard to come by. Then she picked up the pen and signed her name. The press coverage was extensive. "Sterling completes historic acquisition, $5. 4B deal creates global technology giant. Marissa Okonkwo continues unprecedented rise." But the headline that meant most to Marissa came from a small business journal that focused on industry impact rather than stock prices. "Okonkwo deal protects 12,000 jobs, creates pathway for international workforce development." That was the legacy she cared about. Not the billions, though she wouldn't pretend the money didn't matter, but the lives affected. The families who would keep their health care. The communities that wouldn't lose their economic anchors. The people who would never know her name but would benefit from her decisions. "Success isn't what you take," her grandmother had told her once. "It's what you leave behind." 1 year after the Werner Braun acquisition, Marissa stood before a mirror in the Sterling Tower, preparing for the speech that would cap her journey. The Global Business Innovation Summit had invited her to deliver the keynote. The audience would include CEOs, investors, world leaders, and watching via live stream millions of people who had followed her story from the moment the airport video went viral. "Black CEO has card declined, walks away from $5B deal." That had been the headline. The simplified version that made for easy sharing and quick outrage. But the reality, as always, was more complicated. Marissa had never wanted to be a symbol. She'd wanted to build something real, and she had a company, a legacy, a life that meant more than the sum of its acquisitions. But symbols, she'd learned, weren't chosen. They were created by the needs of the people who claimed them. And if her story could give someone else courage, some other girl sleeping in a pantry, some other founder facing down investors who couldn't see past their prejudices, then she would accept that burden. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Watching from Detroit. The church is having a viewing party. We're so proud of you, baby." Marissa smiled. "Thanks, Mama. Love you." Another text, this one from Maya. "Dad would have loved this. He's watching from somewhere. I know it." "I hope so," Marissa typed back. "I really hope so." The speech she delivered that night was not the one she'd prepared. She'd written pages about innovation, about technology trends, about the future of global business. Important topics, safe topics. Instead, she spoke from the heart. "When I was 7 years old, my father left. When I was 11, I slept in a converted pantry. When I was 23, I pitched my first business plan to a room full of investors who thought I was someone's assistant. The audience was silent, rapt. I built my company on a simple principle. No one gets to decide my worth except me. Not the banks that rejected my loan applications. Not the investors who couldn't see past my skin or my gender. Not the executives who tried to humiliate me in airport lounges or boardrooms. She paused, letting the words settle. A year ago, I was offered a deal that would have made me rich beyond imagination. But it came with a price, the expectation that I would accept less than I deserved. That I would smile while being diminished. That I would be grateful for whatever scraps they chose to throw. Her voice hardened. I said no. I walked away from $5 billion because my dignity isn't for sale. Because I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on theirs. A murmur rippled through the audience. And you know what happened? Something better came along. Something that didn't require me to compromise who I am. Something that proved what I've believed my entire life. That excellence, properly applied, will always find its market. She leaned forward, her eyes finding the cameras that would carry her words to the world. To everyone watching, who has ever been underestimated, who has been told they don't belong, who has been measured by someone else's ruler and found wanting. I want you to know, asterisk, they are wrong about you, asterisk. They were wrong about me. And the proof is that I'm standing here tonight, while the people who tried to diminish me are answering to federal investigators. Scattered laughter, then applause, building like a wave. The world will try to convince you that success requires you to become someone you're not, that you have to code switch and minimize and accommodate your way to the top. Maybe, for some people, that's true. But it wasn't true for me, and it doesn't have to be true for you. She straightened to her full height, her natural curls haloed by the stage lights. My name is Marissa Okonkwo. I'm the daughter of a woman who worked 3 jobs to keep me alive. I'm the sister of a woman I didn't meet until I was 42 years old. I'm the child of a father who left me, and whom I forgave at his deathbed. I am every struggle that shaped me, and every triumph that followed. Her voice dropped to something intimate, as if speaking directly to each person in the room. And I'm still standing, still fighting, still building. The ovation, when it came, lasted 4 full minutes. After the speech, after the handshakes and photographs and interviews, Marissa found a quiet corner of the hotel lobby and called her mother. "You did good, baby girl," Grace said, her voice thick with tears. "Your grandmother would have been so proud." "I know, Mama, I know." "Are you happy? Really happy?" Marissa considered the question. For so long, she'd chased achievement as a substitute for happiness, believing that success would fill the emptiness her father's absence had created. But the emptiness hadn't been about him, not really. It had been about her own refusal to let herself be vulnerable, to let herself be loved. "I'm getting there," she said finally. "I'm learning." That's all any of us can do. Keep learning, keep growing, keep becoming. The next morning, Marissa boarded a plane to Detroit. Not for business for the first time in years. She had no urgent meetings, no crises to manage, no fires to put out. Just a weekend with her mother, in the city where her story had begun. Grace picked her up at the airport, driving the modest Honda she'd insisted on keeping despite Marissa's offers to buy her something nicer. Asterisk, I don't need fancy asterisk, she'd said. Asterisk, I need reliable. There's a difference. Asterisk. They drove past the neighborhood where Marissa had grown up, past her grandmother's house, still standing, now painted a different color but structurally the same. Past the school where she'd first learned that intelligence could be a weapon, past the church where Grace still volunteered, feeding the hungry and clothing the poor. "It's smaller than I remember," Marissa said. "Things always are, when we come back to them. We're the ones who got bigger." They had dinner at a restaurant that had been there since Marissa's childhood, a soul food place that still served the best fried chicken in the state. They talked about everything and nothing. About James, who'd met Grace twice now, and passed some unspoken test. About Maya, who was planning to visit next month. About the future, which for the first time felt less like a challenge to be conquered and more like a gift to be unwrapped. "You know what I realized?" Marissa said over dessert. "All those years I was building my company, I thought I was running from something. From poverty, from Dad's abandonment, from everyone who ever said I couldn't. And now Now I realize I was running toward something. I just didn't know what it was until I found it. And what was it? Marissa looked at her mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything, worked impossible hours, loved her unconditionally through every struggle and every triumph. The original source of her strength. Peace, she said. I was running toward peace. Grace reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. 71 years of wisdom and sorrow and joy, compressed into a touch. Then I'm glad you finally caught it, baby girl. You deserved it all along. Outside the restaurant, the Detroit skyline glittered against the night sky. Somewhere in this city, a little girl was sleeping in difficult circumstances, making promises to herself about the future she would build. Somewhere, a young woman was facing down prejudice and being told she didn't belong. Somewhere, someone was being underestimated and preparing to prove the world wrong. Marissa didn't know their names, would probably never meet them, but she knew they existed because she had been them once. And if her story could reach them, if it could show them that the path from nothing to everything was real and walkable and worth every struggle along the way, then every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt and fear and loneliness had been worth it. She took her mother's arm as they walked to the car. You know what Grandma used to say? Grace asked. Which thing? She said a lot of things. She used to say, the only limits that matter are the ones you accept. Everything else is just noise. Marissa smiled. She was right. She usually was. Grace squeezed her arm. And so are you. They drove home through streets that held memories, some painful, some precious, all foundational. Behind them, the city hummed with 8 million stories, 8 million struggles, 8 million possibilities. And in the passenger seat, Marissa Okonkwo watched the lights pass by and allowed herself, finally, to rest. Not because the work was done. It was never done. But because she had learned, at last, that rest was not surrender, that peace was not weakness, that the woman who had walked away from $5 billion to preserve her dignity could also walk toward love, toward family, toward a life that included more than conquest. The empire would continue to grow. The deals would continue to be made. The legacy would continue to take shape. But tonight, there was just this. A mother and daughter, driving home together, building something no acquisition could ever match. Connection, belonging, love. The things that had been there all along, waiting for her to stop running long enough to see them. What price would you pay to protect your dignity, your legacy, your truth? If Marissa's story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by those who underestimate them. Some battles aren't won with force, they're won by knowing when to walk away and having the courage to do it.